Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mount Studio, and today I'm going to teach you how to build a custom control. Specifically, we're going to build a custom segmented control. So what is it going to look like? Well, let's take a look here. Okay, here's what we want it to look like. We want a segmented control that's rounded on the corners. We can add multiple options to it, and it has a highlighter, so when you click on one of these options here, it'll highlight that option. It'll animate to that option. And basically, we're going to replace this segmented control right here. And all these really do are just, hide and show different things on the UI. And before we get into it, I want to explain something to you. What I want to build is something that is customizable and reusable. So I don't want to give it fixed colors. I don't want to give it fixed text or a fixed number of options in the segment. I want it to be customizable so I can just take this control, drop it into my project, and be able to give it as many different segments as I want and use different colors for it. So that is one of my main requirements. It has to be reusable. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's take a look at the project that we have. Here is the segment control that I have right now, but I want to replace this. And what I'm going to do to teach you this, there's a lot to it, but I'm going to start off simple. So you have to watch the whole thing at the end because there's a change I'll be making at the end that's going to make this all work. But we're going to start off really simple first and then keep adding to it. And I'll teach you what's happening along the way. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is create a custom control, and I'm going to put it in my resources folder here. And it's going to be a type of Cocoa Touch class. The class I'm going to start with is a UIView. And remember, I'm starting real simple here. So we'll be changing this after, but only when we need to. So right now, all we really need is just a UIView. So we'll call this custom segmented control. I'll just put it right in the project. Okay, so I have my class here, and it inherits some UIView, and we'll be adding functionality on top of this UIView. Okay, now what I also want to do, I want to be able to change properties and to customize this right on the storyboard. So in order to do that, I need to add a class attribute called IB_Designable. And IB stands for Interface Builder, and that's basically your storyboard where you build your interface. And then once I have that, now where do I start? What property should I start with? Well, let's take a look at our mock-up again here. Okay, so what controls do you think are going to go into this control? Just by looking at this picture, can you think of some controls that we're going to use and put together? There's mainly 3 layers that are going to go into this control. So first, we're going to have a background, which will basically be the size of this control with this thin border going around that's rounded on the ends here. And then the next layer on top of that will be this highlighted part. And that part I'm going to call our selector. I don't really have a name for it, but for this tutorial, I'll just refer to it as the selector. And then on top of that, we're going to have this text. And these are actually going to be UI buttons. So when you click on them, you can interact with them. Like when I click on one way, this selector right here is going to animate over to this position to show you that this one is the one that's selected. Okay, so we have those 3 main layers. So what I'm going to do is let's start from the back first, and then we'll give the background a border where the developer can change the width of that border and change the color of that border. So that's 2 properties right there, border color and border width. So let's add those. I'm going to keep this function here right now. We'll be using it a little bit later, like really soon. Okay, so in order to see these properties in the attributes inspector, I need to make these properties IB inspectable. And that stands for Interface Builder Inspectable. Basically, it just means whatever property comes next, you're going to be able to see it in the attributes inspector. Okay, so what do we say? Border width. And this will be a CG float. And we're going to give it a default value of 0. So by default, there won't be any border. And then when I set this, I want to change the layer of our view. So I'll say layer, and it's the same name, border width equals border width. All right, good. Now we also want border color, right? So we're going to do like exactly the same thing here, except just change the names. And it's the type UIColor. And by default, let's just make this clear. There we go. And when I did set this, I want to set the layers border color. There we go. Oh, you know what? I made a mistake. That's not IB designable. That should be IB inspectable. There we go. And then here, what's this problem? Well, the border color on the layer is actually a CGColor. It's a different type. Similar, but a different type. It's just a core graphics color. And this is just a UI color. So how do we convert this color to a CG color? Well, it might tell you right here. Yeah, ignore this. This is one way to do it, so it can convert it to a CG color. But there's actually a built-in property that we can access called CGColor. And I kind of like this way better. All right, good. So we have the beginnings of our control. We have a border width and border color. Let's see what that looks like on the storyboard. And what I'll do for now is I'll just move this down. Move this up. I'll still keep it there. But let's drag a UIView on here. And this is going to be our new control, our custom control. And I'll make it like that big. Okay, in order to use this, we first have to make it that type, custom segmented control. And if we come here, we'll notice our new properties for our custom segmented control. Border width, we'll just make it a 1. And a border color. Let's see, if we make it like a red, it should stick out. Yeah, there we go. Let's get rid of the background too. And again, you don't need a custom property for this. You can just change it right here. All right, that's good. Now notice we also need rounded corners on this. So what we'll do is we'll come back into our control here. And we're going to use this function right here, this draw function. So let's get rid of this. And this draw function does just this. It basically gets executed whenever you're drawing something on the storyboard or when your application is run. So in here, we basically want to change the corner radius of the layer. So basically notice how we're accessing the layer here. The border, all the border properties are on the layer, not on the UI view itself. So it's actually the UIView.layer.borderWidth, UIView.layer.borderColor, and this is the corner radius, which will round the corners for us. So what number should we use? Well, I'm not going to hard code it because, again, I want this reusable. So you can make the UI view any size and it'll automatically use the correct corner radius to give it a nice rounded end. So in order to create that nice rounded end, we're going to look at the frame and we're going to look at the height. And we're going to divide it by 2. Okay, there you go. So basically what this is doing is, when you look at the height, say the height is 100. If you want it nice and rounded, then you have to make the corner radius 50. So let's see what that looks like. You wait for it to refresh. There you go. So now what I should be able to do is just resize this, and it's going to change the corner radius automatically for me. Okay, perfect. Now I'm just using a red color here because it sticks out more. You'll be able to see it more when you're watching this video, but we'll change it at the end. Okay, what's the next step? Well, we have the selector, but I'm going to draw the selector last because the selector doesn't know where it should go unless it knows what options you have here. So we're going to create these buttons first. Now remember what I said at the beginning of the video is I want to be able to determine how many options at design time. Like I don't want to hard code these options here. So I need a way to accept those options. And the only way I can find out to do this with an IB designable is create a string property and have it be comma delimited. So, I would say round trip, comma, one way, comma, multi-city. So let's do that. Okay, so I'll need a property to be able to hold or store that comma delimited string so I can access it. Okay, if I want to set my options in the attributes inspector, I need another property with the IB inspectable attribute. And I'm just going to create a property and I'll call it comma separated button titles. And of course it'll be a string. And by default, it'll have no value. Now when I set this, I'm going to be processing that string. So I'm not going to put any functionality in here. Instead, when I say did set, I'm going to call a function called updateView. Now this function doesn't exist yet, so we have to create it. Okay, so the next step here is where we're going to be doing the bulk of the processing. We want to be able to take these strings, separate them out, and turn them into buttons, and then space them evenly throughout the control. Okay, so one of the things I need to do is I need a variable to hold an array of my buttons. So when I take this string, I'm going to slice up that string and then turn each individual string in between the commas into a button. So I need an array of buttons. And I'll just call it buttons here. And I'm just going to create an array, like an empty array of buttons to begin with. And you do that just like this. So this will create an array of buttons, but there won't be anything in it. So what I need to do is I need to take that string, and we're going to parse out that string first. And I'll just call it button titles. Now, Swift makes this really easy. So I'm just going to take that string that we have, our comma separated titles here, and you can access the components property. Components is like each individual item in your string. And we're going to separate it right here, separated by, and of course it's just going to be a comma. Now you don't have to use a comma. Another common delimiter or separator is a bar, so you could always do that too. But for this, I'll just use a comma. And then now that we have that, this is an array of strings right here. We want to go through each item in that array and turn them into buttons. So I'm just going to say for button title in button titles, like that. Okay, so we want a button, so let's instantiate that. And we can just set the type of the button right here. And it's basically just going to be a .system button. And then from here, we can just set all the properties of this button. So right now, all we're going to do for this button is set the title for it. Right here, set title. Title is like the text. And it will be button title. This is each individual one in the array. And for control state, it'll just be normal. So it's not going to be disabled. It's not going to be highlighted. It's just going to be normal button. Okay, now once I have that button, I need to add it to this array up here, because I'm going to be doing further processes on this array of buttons. You know, we still have to place them, right? Okay, and to add something to an array, you just do an append. Oh. There we go. Append. We're going to append our button. Okay, good. Now this can get set multiple times, right? So every time I set this comma separated button titles, like maybe I add 2 options at first, and then I change my mind, and then I add 3 options. Or every time I add an option, this updateView will get set. And this array, it'll just keep adding and adding and adding to this array. So one of the things that we have to do when we first come in here is clear out our array. So I might add 2 items, and it adds 2 items to the array. And then I change my mind, I add 3 items. And if I leave the code just like this, it's going to add 5 items to the array. So I need to clear it out and then set everything brand new. So for buttons, arrays have this handy function. So you can just say remove all, and it just clears out the array for you. All right, that should be good. Okay, so our next step is to take this array of buttons and add it to our UIView. And let's think about how we're going to do this. So we could loop through this buttons array, and with each one, add it to the UIView and position it so it's just perfect and equally spaced, right? But there's an easier way. Instead, what we can do is just add a UIStackView to our UIView, and then we can just put the buttons in there. And the UIStackView will position everything equally for us, so we don't have to do anything. So what we'll have to do is add that UIStackView. So let's create our stack view, and I'm just going to call the variable sv. We'll create our UIStackView. Now here's something really handy. So one of the constructors here takes in an array of UI views, and that is perfect. That is exactly what we need, because we have an array of UI views. Well, what we actually have is an array of UI buttons, but they all inherit from UIView, so it still works. So we're just going to pass in buttons right here. Okay, all of our buttons are in the stack view. Now we need to configure the stack view as well. So let's see, SV, and the first thing we're going to set is the axis. An axis basically just tells us, is it going to be horizontal or vertical? So we just want to say, we want you to be horizontal. And then we also want to set the alignment too. And that's going to be fill. You know, you probably are familiar with seeing these different options here if you've used StackView before. We want fill. So basically it stretches out the buttons. So these buttons will basically take up all the space of the stack view. And then we need to set the distribution. And that will be fillProportionally. Okay, and once we have that stack view, we can add it to our UI view. And to do that, you just want to add subview like this. This is the one that we want to use. And we're going to add our stack view. Now there's just one thing that we're missing. We're not telling the stack view how wide and how tall it has to be. So what we need to do is we need to tell the stack view, I want you to be as wide as our UI view and as high as our UI view. Otherwise, it's just going to default to the width of our buttons. So let's do that. And one of the things that I always forget to do is this property right here called translates auto resizing mask into constraints. And basically what that means is, like, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this before, but say you have a control on here, like this label, and it's using auto resizing. So when you run the project, it translates these into constraints. It actually says, oh, I'm going to add a trailing constraint, a left constraint, and a top constraint. So it translates all of these auto resizing masks into constraints. Well, we don't want it to do that. So we need to turn that off, because we're going to set our own constraints. And we can do that pretty easily by just accessing the different constraints, the anchors on the control. So we have a top anchor, and we want to say constraint that equal to, and basically for the top one, we want to be able to, let me give ourselves some more space here. We want to constrain that to the UI view's top anchor, right? So if we say self.topAnchor, so now we're just taking our stack view basically and saying, oh, the top anchor is going to be equal to its parents or the UI view's top anchor. But this isn't enough. What we have to do is actually set it to active. We have to make that true. So it says, okay, you can make this constraint true. Otherwise, it's not going to have any effect. So we want to do that with our other anchors too. So as you can guess, there's a left anchor, a right anchor, and a bottom anchor. So we'll set those. So we want to constrain the stack view's bottom anchor to the UI view's bottom anchor. And we have to make that active. Okay, and I'm just going to set the left anchor and the right anchor as well. All right, there we go. I think we're done. But there's one thing missing here. Now remember, this can get called multiple times, this updateView. So every time we change this property, this is going to get called. And if we don't change anything, it's just going to keep adding a stack view, adding a stack view, adding a stack view. So what we need to do is we need to be able to remove the stack view and all the buttons every time this is called. Just like we need to clear out the array, we need to clear out all of the subviews. And there's something here that I want to show you guys too. Now, what you can do is there's an array of subviews. Basically, this has a collection of everything that's in this UI view. It includes the stack view and all the buttons. So what we can do is we can loop through this and remove them all one by one. But there's this function on arrays called ForEach, and we're going to use this instead. And you can see the description here. It calls a given closure on each element in the sequence in the same order as a for-in loop. So basically, you have this closure that it gives you, like a block of code, that it will run for every single element in an array. And if you're not too familiar with this, well, there's help on it too. So if we come here and we click on this ForEach, and you take a look over here, it's pretty nice documentation they give you this time. Let me make some more room here. They actually give you examples here. So here's an example of a for-in loop that they're using on number of words. You can see it's an array that has 3 items in it, 1, 2, 3. And so they say for word in number of words or number words, and they print it. But then they give you an example of using a ForEach, and it's basically just saying, you have your variable here, and for each word in this array, you run print word. There's even a shorter syntax that you can use for this as well. So notice what it did for us too. When we created the ForEach loop, it knows that that first parameter that we're going to be passing in is a UIView. So it's very type specific here. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this part and hit enter. And I can just give my variable any name I want, like this. And then what I can do is just say view.remove from superview. And this basically just removes it from the parent. It'll remove it from our UIView. Okay, good. So that is how you use a ForEach. And there's one other thing I want to show you too. Now here we create a variable view that's being passed in, and then we use that variable here. Well, there's another shorthand that you can use. So if we delete this, we can refer to that first variable, the parameter that's being passed in, with just a $0. So this is totally valid. $0 is basically just kind of a shorthand. It's optional. You can do it the other way if it makes more sense and you can remember it better. But I just want to show you like another option here. So $0 represents the first parameter, which is our UIView. Oh, look, it actually says it up here, UIView. I never noticed that before. All right, cool. Okay, good. So we're removing everything from our view. Now let's test this and see how it looks. Okay, so we have this comma-separated list here. So I'm just going to do a test here. Just say 1, 2. All right, perfect. So it added our buttons, it put it inside the stack view, and now we have 2 options in our segmented control. That's exactly what we want. But one thing we do need to change, we want to be able to give this a different color. So we'll add that property next. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to fix this with what we're actually going to be using. Okay, good. See, it looks perfect. This is exactly what we want. And I want to show you guys how to do this too, because I want you to be able to create this control and use it in your projects and have it be reusable. Not just in one project. So I didn't want to show you something that's hard-coded. I wanted to give you guys a way where you can create your own properties, add multiple items, and have it display perfectly the way you want it. All right, so let's go into this control here. We can just come through here. And we want to be able to change that color. So we'll create another property. Can you guys guess how I'm going to do this? Yeah, we're just going to create a UIColor here. So I need my inspectable, so I can change it right in this storyboard. And we'll just call this text color. It'll be a type UIColor. And by default, you can give it any default you want. I'll just choose the light gray. I don't want to make it clear because then we won't be able to see the text. So if we add options and it shows the text, it'll be clear color and you won't be able to see it. Okay, when we did set it, we're just going to call updateView. So when we create our buttons, we want to set the text color right here. Set title color, there it is. And we'll reference our text color. And this will also be for normal state. Okay, good. Let's see how that looks. Okay, good. We have our text color here. And what if we just make it orange? There we go. Okay, it's looking good. I think we can change these colors now. Go back to the light gray. Actually, what did I have here? A little bit lighter, huh? No, light gray. It looks like it's light gray. The border is definitely maybe a light gray as well. Okay, there we go. All right, looking good. So what's our next step? Our next step is to create our selector, that background here, to show which one is actually selected. There's also something else that I changed. Notice the one that's selected, the text color is lighter. So this is more of a white and this is more of a light gray. So we need to make that change as well. So how are we going to create this selector? Well, as you might have guessed, that selector is just a UIView that we're moving around. So let's create a variable to hold that selector, the UIView. And I'm going to use an exclamation point because we're definitely going to have one. We're definitely going to create one. Okay, one property that I will need is a color because I want to be able to change the color for the selector. So let's add that. In default, I'm going to make it a dark gray. But again, if you guys are creating your own, use any default that you want. And when I did set it, I want to just call updateView like that. Okay, let me just look at something here. Now for this color right here, we also need a property to store that color. So we have a property to set the button color, text color, but now we want the selected color. We want to be able to customize that selected color. So let's create a property for that too. And I'm just going to call it Selector Text Color. And I'll default it to white. And I think you guys can see the pattern here. Every time you change a property, I'm just going to call updateView. Okay, so we have our selector. Now we want to add that to our UIView, our control. And we could just do that. I don't know, we just put it in right here. So since we already have our selector variable, I'm just going to reference that. Okay, I think I want to use this frame right here, this constructor. Okay, so I'm going to create a new CGRect for the frame, and I'm going to use this constructor right here. Now for the X is the horizontal axis. So where will this selector start? Well, it'll be starting off on the left-hand side, which would be 0. And Y will also be 0, so it'll start off in the, this basically says it'll start off in the upper left-hand corner. So it'll start off on the left, and it will be aligned to the top. Now for the width, though, remember the width is only going to be, well, think about this. How wide should it be? If we have 3 items in there, then you want the width to be 33%, right? So how do you get that width? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a variable here, and I'll call it selector width. Of course, that variable doesn't exist yet, so I'll just create it up here. Okay, and to get that width, basically I'm just going to take the frame of the UI view and look at its width, and then I'm just going to divide it by however many items that I have. So let's take a look. I have an array of button titles, and I'm just going to take a look at the count. So if this width is 100 and I have 3 button titles, you know, it's just basically 100 divided by 3, so it's going to give me like 33 in here, right? What is this complaining about? Oh, yeah, okay, so the width is a CG float, but this count is an int. So what I'll have to do is convert this to a CG float. Okay, that should do it. And what is this problem here? Oh, okay, so I used int as my constructor, but actually I should have picked the CG float. That's okay. It just, if we just change this one, it should fix it. So it knows it's not an int. So the height will be basically the same height as your UI view. So if you look at your UIView.frame.height, that's what we want to use. That should fix it. Let's take a look. Yeah, that looks good. We're just missing a closed parenthesis there. Okay. Okay, so now we have the exact size of our UI view. But notice for our selector. But remember, we need to be able to change it somehow. We need to give it the rounded corners. And how do we do that? Well, it'll be just like our code down here where we gave our UI view the rounded corners. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, we need to set that color. So we create a couple of properties here. We have the selector color. So let's set that. All right, good. So I think we're in good shape. Now that we have our selector, we can just add it to the UI view. Okay. Now let's take a look at that. Let's see what that looks like. All right, not bad, not bad. And if I come here into the attributes inspector, okay, I have a selector color here. Change it to red. Yep, it changes. Okay, good. We'll change it to, what do we have here? Let's select the light gray again. Okay. And as you can see here, there's one more thing we need to implement, and that is the color of the text that is being selected. So right now the text color is light gray and the selector is light gray. So obviously we need to make it a different color so it will show up. And we're going to use this property right here, selector text color. And by default, when you first come in here, when we first use this control, there's going to be one button that is the default selected button, right? So what we'll do is we'll just access that button array, and we'll change the color of the text for the first button. Paste in our property there, and it'll be for .normal. Okay, let's see how that looks. There we go. Remember, it defaulted to white, so that's why we didn't have to set it. But we can set it to a different color if we want. I'll just leave it at white. All right, that looks good. All right, guys, everything's looking good. Our control is looking perfect. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to interact with it. We want to be able to click these buttons. We want to be able to move the selector so it moves to that button you just clicked. So let's do that. Now we want to be able to react to the button clicks. So what I need to do is call a function every time I click on one of these buttons. And normally when we add functions to buttons, we do it through an action outlet. Well, there's another way to relate functions with button clicks, and that is by calling add target. Right here. Associates a target object and action method with the control. So what is our target? Well, the target is basically, what class is going to be handling this. So it's kind of like your target is your class, your action is your function in that class, and then which event are you responding to? So we're using this class for our target, and our action, well, we don't have a function right now, but we'll add one. So I'll just say selector, and then this is where you add your function. And I'll just call it button tapped. And, actually, hold on. Let's back up a little bit. I think this will make more sense if I create this function first, just so you can see what happens. So I'll create the function down here. Okay, function button tapped. And, basically, we're going to make it look like an action outlet for a UI button. So as you might know, usually that says sender right there. And we pass in a type of UI button, which is the button that was clicked. Here is kind of like the tricky part. What I want to do is every time you tap a button, I need to go through our collection of buttons, find out which match it up to the one that was clicked, and I have to change some things to it, right? I have to be able to change the title color of the button that was clicked. And I need to reset the title color of the button, the previous button. So I need to loop through my collection of buttons, and I'll just say for button in buttons. So no matter what button it is, we're just going to reset the text color to the default color. Yeah, that one right there. And it's for the normal state. Okay, so the text color is being reset on all the buttons. And we want to know if the button we are on is the button that was clicked on. So it will just say if the button equals button. So you're just basically saying if this is the button that you clicked on, is this parameter right here? So you're saying, is this button the one I'm on that I'm cycling through? If it is, then we want to change button set title color to the selected color for .normal. All right, let's just test this and see if that works. Let's see, is there an error that we have here? Oh yeah, I never finished this. Okay, so for this action, let's go back to our selector. This is the function that we want to call, and it is the button tapped right here. So this is why I want to create the function first, because you can just hit that and it'll automatically format it for you. And then here we have to tell it which event are we responding to. And it's basically the touch up inside. There it is, right there, touch up inside. All right, good. Okay, so let's run that and see if it works. Now remember, we're just testing the text color, making sure the text color changes. We haven't done anything with the selector yet. Okay, good. Okay, it's being reset, but these should be turning white. So let's see if we can figure that out. This is why I like to test incrementally, because if I add too much functionality and I test, it's harder to debug. Like I know I've only written this code right here since I last, took a look and tested it. Oh, yeah, here's the problem here. I used the wrong property. You guys might have noticed that when I did it. Okay, selector text color. All right, let's run that. Yeah, there we go. Much better. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to move that selector background or animate it. So when I click on this, it animates over to this one. And I'm going to use this same function right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an animation right here. This is where we're actually going to move it. We got UIView.animate, and I'm just going to use a simple one here. I'll use kind of like the Apple default of 0.3 seconds. What we're going to do is change the frame origin X. So if I come in here and grab our selector, and then frame, and look at the origin, then it's the X property that I'm actually changing. So notice I'm not using any constraints here. This is an alternative way to moving something, is just basically changing its origin. And X is the horizontal line that goes back and forth. So that's all I'm changing is just the X property. And that's fine for what we need. And basically, I want to change it to, I'll create a variable for this. We'll call it selector start position. And let's create a variable up here. Okay, and to get the start position, this is similar to, how we figured out the width of the selector, sort of. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how big the control is, the frame.width, and this is the UIView.frame.width, the control that we're in. And I want to divide it by our count of how many buttons we have. And remember before we had to use a CG float, so let's not make that mistake again. So let's look at our buttons collection and look at the count there. Okay, but notice this isn't really the start position. So here's how I'm going to calculate it. So I took the width, I divided it by how many buttons we have. So if we have 3 buttons, so basically if the width is 100 and we have 3 buttons, I'm going to get 33 back. But if I'm on the third button, 33 doesn't really mean the third button. The third button should be, well, we have 0 for the first one, 33 for the second, and 66 will be the third button. So what I need to do is multiply it by which button I'm on, by my button index, like this. But the only problem is I don't have an index. Because I'm using a for in, it doesn't give me an index by default. But there is a way to get the index of which one I'm on, and I'll show you how to do that. It's a little bit different. You can actually declare it right here. So this will give me the index as well as the control in this collection right here, in this array. But I have to change this array to enumerated, like that. And that will give me, not only will it give me a button, it'll give me an index as well, and it'll put the index in here. Now this isn't working because I think this index is a different type than a CG float. Yeah, it's an int. So we have to convert this to a CG float. Okay. So now remember, so the first one, the way this will work is if the first button is selected and it tries to do this calculation, it takes the width, divides it by however many buttons I have. So it'll give me like a 33. And then if I multiply it by 0, it'll just give me a 0, which is exactly what I want. The three positions, starting positions, is either 0, 33, or 66. Okay, so this should work for us. Let's test this. Look at that. All right, guys, looking good, looking good. All right, what else do we need to do now? Okay, the next thing that we need to do is we need to be able to wire up this control to a function. So right now, nothing happens, right? And let me show you something. Like, let's go back to our storyboard. Let's go into the assistant view here. Okay. So I have this function right here already. You know, it's already wired up to this segment. But I want to, I want to wire this up to this function. But notice I can't. See, I don't get that blue border when I hover over it. Well, that's because all this is right now so far is just a UI view. In order to be able to send out events or to be able to like right click it and put it over here, like right now, it's not going to allow me to create an action. I can only create an outlet for it. I can't create an action for it. So in order to create an action for it, I actually need to inherit from another control. And this is kind of like what I was saying at the beginning, where I didn't want to explain it at the beginning and kind of like overload you. I wanted to see you like kind of like how I went about this process and testing it. And so the next thing we're going to do is change this to a UI control, which is super easy. We're basically just going to change this right up here and change it to a UI control. And this will basically give you the ability to have it trigger events for you. So what does that mean basically? Well, that basically allows us, a UI control gives you the functionality to send actions. Like if you touch up inside, it can send out that action, kind of like broadcast it. And if your view controller is listening for it, like if you wire it up to your view controller, you can respond to it. So when you tap a button, after we do the animation here, we can send out an action now. Send actions. And this is only available if you inherit from a UI control. And for a UI control event, I think some of these should look familiar to you. For your buttons, when you wire up actions, you can choose from these different events. And what we're going to do is we're just going to use the value changed. Because for a segment control, that's actually when you wire it up, that's what you're wiring it up to. Like here, let me show you. If we go back to our view and we look at the existing control, if you right click here, you see the event we're responding to is value changed. And you can see here, it says sent events. And that's exactly what you're doing. I mean, here it's called sent events, but what we're using is send action. It would be kind of cool if Apple, synchronized their terminology here. So we're sending an action. These are sent actions or sent events. Events and actions, it's very similar. All right, so now let's try to wire it up. Okay, so we should be able to wire this up now. And if we take a look, now there's action. There we go. Okay, before it was just outlets, but now we can create an action outlet. And if you look at here, we also have our control, our custom control. And we're responding, the default event that we're responding to is value changed. But if we had like touch down or, touch up inside, nothing's going to happen because we're not sending out any of those events, right? We're just sending out the value changed event or the value changed action. Okay, so I'll just call this custom segment value changed. Okay. And really, we just want to run this same code that we had in our other one. Okay, let's build that, see how that looks. All right, good. Here's one last thing that we need to do. We don't have a property called selected segment index. The segment control does. The UI segmented control has a selected segment index. So we need to set this. Every time we click a button, we need to tell it what the index is. The first one will be 0, then 1, or 2. So we have one last step. Let's go back and fix that. And we're going to do it right here. So I'll say selected segment index equals, and then we create a button index, right? Okay. Well, this property doesn't exist yet, of course, so I need to add it up here. We want to default it to 0. And when you click a button, it'll change that. Okay, so let's go back to our view controller. And let's see if that builds. Okay, good. So it has a select segment index. So let's run it and see if it works. There we go. So you notice when I click on this one, it changes. It shows this button one way. It hides the button. Go to round trip, and it shows the 2 controls down here. All right, guys, that is it. Everything seems to be working just fine. And if we run this on different sizes, it should still work because all these measurements are all dynamic, right? So not to take up too much of your time, but let's test it on a different size. There's one thing I want to test. There's one thing I want to look at first, and that's the auto resizing. Yeah, let's just make it stretch out to the size of the phone. So if we go to like a 7 Plus, yeah, it stretches out, and even so this size even looks good. If we go to an iPad, that'll probably look funny. Yeah, because nothing else is dynamic. But look at this. So it even resizes to this. You know, the selector looks fine. And if we run it on this, it'll probably work just fine too. Of course, the rest of it will look pretty funny. Let's choose the largest device here and see how it looks. Okay. Yep, still looks good. All right, guys, so there you go. There's your custom control. And I have a challenge for you. Now here, you know, I decided to make it, you know, with rounded corners, you know, for the selector. But I want you to try different things. So for example, instead of a rounded segmented control like this, you could also not have border on it. And then you could create like a bar that goes under it, like the YouTube app on your phone. You know, that's kind of like a more of an Android material design. But you could create something like that. Or you can create some other fancy selectors that maybe something that has like an arrow pointing to the one that you're on. Or you can highlight the button that you click a different way. So here's a challenge for you. Come up with some of your own designs and, you know, be creative with it. See what looks good and do some testing. And then if you want, post it on Twitter. I'd love to see the designs that you guys come up with and how you customize this control for your own needs. Put it on Twitter and tag me at Big Mountain Studio. And I will see the message and I'll see your design. I think it'd be really cool to share with the rest of the community too. All right, thanks guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's kind of long, but we covered a lot of different things. So I'm sure you learned a lot all through this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. If you'd like to help out the channel or this video, consider submitting a translation for your native language. That would really help me out. All right, thanks guys.